Welcome to the last day of the 104th Conservative Party conference after a week in which government ministers have used this platform behind me to promote their promised radical plans for a third term. We've heard from a number who will be piloting important bills through the Commons in the new Parliament: Kenneth Baker on education, William Waldegrave on housing, Nicholas Ridley and Michael Howard on the community charge. One or two have found time to revel in past achievements. The Chancellor, Nigel Lawson, and the Foreign Secretary, Sir Geoffrey Howe, both gave rousing reviews of the past year. There's been a great deal of talk about the need not to be complacent, not to gloat over the misfortunes of others, though one or two have deviated from that resolution. However, in the words of one of the motions to be debated this morning on party policy and organisation, it is not in the character of the Conservative Party nor in the national interest for the party to rest on its laurels. Well, with that and a debate on Sunday trading, the conference will be working itself up to the highlight of the week. That's the traditional speech from Mrs. Thatcher this afternoon. But first we're going to hear from a man who had a lot to do with party organisation during the last election campaign, Norman Tebbit, and he's talking to Sir Robin Day.
Mr. Tebbit, I've known you for a good many years, and I'm in some difficulty this morning, and I wondered if you'll be kind enough to give me your advice.
Well, anything, a consultancy fee, perhaps, Sir Robin?
Just between these four walls. You see, I thought of a lot of questions which I want to ask you, and which a number of people have suggested to me, but I can't imagine that you'll give answers to any of them.
It's a bit unlikely, I imagine. This is, after all, a party conference week, isn't
but
it?
What do you suppose I do? Should I just bash ahead and hope for the best?
Yes, do.
Right, is this your last speech as party chairman this morning?
I think that there's a fair likelihood of that. After all, we've got 12 months before the next conference, and as you know, I've said that the one certainty is that I will not, that I will not be leading the party as chairman at the next general election.
Why is there such a dispute raging over your successor? Are you such a difficult man to replace?
Well, I don't know. It's not for me to say, and indeed it's not for me to choose my successor. That rests with the Prime Minister. And I think it's a difficult slot to fill, not least because I think it should be somebody in the Cabinet. And of course, that limits the field a little, and everybody in the Cabinet has already got quite heavy duties.
It hasn't always been a member of the Cabinet, has it?
No, but I think in recent years the role has become more important, and it combines well with the role, of course, of a non-departmental minister.
Non-departmental minister?
Yes, it combines well with that role.
So it combines badly with the role of a departmental minister?
I'm not necessarily saying that that's so, but both Cecil Parkinson and I carried on that role of a non-departmental minister, and it can be quite useful in the Cabinet.
Your remarks are bound to be interpreted as meaning that you agree with those who think that it would be undesirable for Lord Young, Chair of the Department of Trade and Industry, to combine that most important department with the job of chairman of the party.
I'm not saying that because it's not for me to say.
No.
What I do say, though, is that one way of combining, of being in the Cabinet is with a non-departmental job. It gives the time, and it also enables one to be on all the key Cabinet committees, so you have a very good view of what's going on.
But one Cabinet Minister whose name you have mentioned with some approval, though of course it isn't your choice, has got a departmental job, namely Mr. John Major, the Chief Secretary.
Yes, I think I slightly misunderstood the question that was put to me then. I thought it was in the context of well, Mr. Tebbit, you've been the ordinary chap in the Cabinet and in the party. Who will take on that role? And I was suggesting there were a number of people, and John is certainly one who might do so. Now, I don't see him as chairman of the party. I think a Chief Secretary of the Treasury, he's just got himself worked into that job, and he's doing it extremely well.
Do you think there is a conflict between the job of the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, with his contact with industrialists and so on, and being chairman of the party when he wants to get money out of industrialists?
I've always found that I was able to act as a shield between members of the government and people who were contributors in a way which minimised any allegation that by giving money to the party that industrialists could buy something. And it's important to remember that we don't have any people buying votes at our conference with money, for example. I think that's a very good thing. The idea of the chairman of ICI coming along and laying down 1.5 million votes on behalf of all his shareholders would be quite absurd. In fact, I'm not even sure that ICI give us any money. I don't think they do.
Your speech at the beginning of the conference which was a great success and in your old style, which the conference liked very much. Do you, that didn't give me the impression, or did anybody else the impression that you were in any way quitting politics?
No, I'm not quitting politics, but I'm leaving the government. I have left the government, indeed, and as I say, I don't expect to be chairman of the party for the next 3 or 4 years. But I can still have a political role outside that.
That's what I want to ask you. What is the political role of such an activist like yourself on the sidelines? What are you going to do, wander in and speak on the occasional debate or something, like Ted Heath?
Yes, I might. Well, I wander in and speak in the occasional debate, at any rate, I'm sure. And there's the prospect of talking, meetings of the party around the country. I don't suppose I shall stop doing that entirely. Even if I were invited now and again, I might be very privileged to come along and be interviewed by you, Robin. And you see, at times, there's a role for someone who can get out ahead of the government, who can begin to say things which ministers can't say at that stage because their thinking has not been finally crystallised.
So you're visualising in the years ahead, the 3 or 4 years ahead, a good deal of issues on which an independent but loyal Conservative voice will be of great use to the party.
Yes, I think that can be very useful. You see, very often when the government is trying to come to a final conclusion on difficult aspects of policy, it may only be the last details which they're not agreed. But because the whole package isn't agreed, ministers can't get out there and defend it and sell it. And so you have the familiar story, perhaps Mr. Redhead saying, we invited the Secretary of State for whatever it was, or the government to send a spokesman, but they declined. Well, perhaps now and again I could just fill that role and put the government's view, or what I thought was the government's view, without committing ministers.
So if ministers funk being asked the right questions, they'll just trundle you along to take the punishment.
No, it's not a question of that. But until the Cabinet has reached a final conclusion on a policy, they can't say that is the policy of the government. Now, I can go along and say I think it ought to be the policy of the government, so I can defend at times when they can't. And indeed, I can attack at times when they can't.
Well, why is it? A lot of people ask this question. I don't know whether you can give us an indication of the truth. Why did you fall out with Mrs. Thatcher?
Oh, I think I didn't fall out with Mrs. Thatcher. Ever since I've been working with her, there have been moments when we've not seen entirely eye to eye. The strength of the relationship is that despite that, we've always worked together, because she said a very nice thing the other evening at the meeting where she spoke to the Conservative agents. She said, you know, one of the difficult things about Norman as party chairman is that he makes the speech before I do. We never coordinate our speeches. We don't have to, but he always uses my best lines because we think alike. And that's been the quality of the relationship.
But there have been some periods, despite that close relationship, particularly in the period since the Westland affair, when both you and Mrs. Thatcher have both been inclined to get rid of each other, haven't you?
Well, I've never been inclined to get rid of her. Good God, that would be a crazy thing to do. It would have been the way to lose the general election. Whether she's been tempted to that, to get rid of me, that's a matter for her to say, not me. No, we, of course, have differences of view from time to time. We're both quite strong-minded people. But that's not to fall out with each other.
Let me return to the Tory chairmanship for a moment. What sort of chairman do you think is needed? I'm not talking about identity. Does he have to be a big politician to give political leadership in this period when the next election is a long way off? Or can he be an organisational figure? Or should he be a relatively minor figure?
Well, I think as you approach the election, he has to be a major figure, because the chairman is bound to play a major part. So then he needs probably a balance which is more towards the public figure. The organisational work should have been done largely by the time you need that. At this stage of the game, perhaps the organisational skills are at least as important than the presentational skills.
What changes are needed in the Tory party organisation? Because it's generally regarded, according to all the papers and the books I'd read, the book about the election, which talked about your role, campaign, I think that it was in a shambles at the time of the election, and you won it in spite of the Tory party organisation.
Yes. Well, I think that's a slightly odd view, as I've said before. You know, if that's what we can do with a rotten campaign, give me another rotten campaign next time, and we'll do it again. No, basically,
wasn't the Prime Minister very dissatisfied with the campaign? I hear reliable reports that she was in tears at times.
I don't think I can ever recollect seeing the Prime Minister in tears, least of all about a matter of organisation. She'd be in action, not in tears. No, the organisation is basically a very good one. There are some things we can do to strengthen it. There were some things I would like to have done in the past to strengthen it, but for various reasons we didn't have time to get them arranged. And that can be done now. We've already begun to strengthen the organisation in Scotland, for example. There we've brought in some new people, we've tightened the organisation, particularly on the communications side. And I think also in the party, not just in central office, but out in the country there's some work to do. I think particularly in getting stronger organisations in the cities.
Now, there's an article by Lord Hailsham, that wise elder statesman of the Tory party, in the Times today, and I can't do justice to it in a brief summary, but what he just does say is this, that it's not enough for the Conservative Party to, he's talking about the third term, which you now have, it's not enough to do the trick for a third successive term. The Conservative Party must, perhaps more than ever, ask itself seriously about its enduring role in public life. And Lord Hailsham is saying that the Tory party has now become, under Margaret Thatcher, a radical reforming party, rather ideological, whereas in the past its tradition has been to, as its name implies, a traditional party. Now it's ideological instead of pragmatic, and it's in danger of losing the centre ground to Mr. Kinnock's Labour Party, as Mr. Biffin said on television last night.
I think that's an entirely wrong appreciation of it, if I may say so. What happened for the first 30 years or so after the war was that everyone believed, almost everyone believed, that politics was going to move steadily left, that industries were going to be nationalised but not denationalised, that the state was going to exert greater and greater control, and that was never going to draw back, and that the Labour Party was the radical reforming party, and that we Conservatives would come in and we'd, so to speak, run the nationalised industries better. We'd take off the rough edges of socialism but do nothing to turn it back. Well, since 1979, that's been turned on its head. We're now the radical and reforming party, and the Labour Party is wondering whether its role will be to come forward and say, well, we approve of what's been done, but we could take the rough edges of it. You know, we could make privatisation work better. Now, I'm content if that's what they want to do, but above all, I'm content with our role as the radical and reforming agents in society.
Yes, the question arises is whether by having a surge of radicalism and ideological and doctrinal conservatism under Mrs. Thatcher, you aren't, as it were, departing from the very tradition and the very qualities which have kept the Conservative Party in power off and on for so very long.
If you'd put that point to Benjamin Disraeli, he would have given you an answer very similar to that which I've given you. The Disraeli Conservative Party was a reforming party. It was a radical party, and that was why it was a great party. It was after the Second World War, when we had no ambition beyond to be in office and, as I say, make the nationalised industries work better, that we lost our edge, and indeed that Britain lost its edge too.
Would not Mr. Disraeli have said something about Britain being one nation? And
Indeed.
It's now, it said under Mrs. Thatcher, I can hear him saying up there, it's two nations.
No, I don't think that's necessarily so, because our ambition is to recreate one nation. There were two nations anyway. There were the nation of people who were doing very well in the public sector, and those in the private sector who were very often seeing their companies damaged by the government's policies.
Right, well,
I think we can extend the good things which have been gained by many people from the Thatcher revolution to far more people. That's our ambition. I want to see us with well over 50% of the electorate voting Conservative.
Well, you've never had that since the war, have you?
That's right. The nearest was 49.7, I think, in 1955.
You've done your homework very well. Let me just ask you one or two final questions, very, very briefly. You have joined an organisation, a director of an organisation which owns, I think, William Hill, the bookmakers?
Would you like an account?
That's not the purpose of my question. I want to ask, what odds do you give in that capacity? What odds do you give that you will announce your departure today?
Oh, I think I should let the market work, you know, and anyway, I don't want to be found guilty of this insider trading business. You have to be terribly careful these days.
Can you give me, what odds would you give, which won't be insider trading, because it's not a question of knowledge, what odds do you give that Mrs. Thatcher will still be leader of the party at the next election?
Fascinating question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Shall we go down to William Hill when we've got off screen and find out what they're offering?
And finally, do you give me any odds at all that you will, as to whether you would come back into politics as party leader, perhaps, after Mrs. Thatcher?
I think it's very unlikely, because I think there are a lot of very good candidates coming up, and I fancy that when she does step down, I hope I'll be drawing my old age pension anyway, and I hope and expect that there will be many good candidates for that job, which is not one which I find terribly attractive.
You won't be drawing your old age pension for about 10 years, Mr. Tebbit.
Well, there you are, you see.
Far longer than it'll take me to earn mine. Well, thank you. I'm sorry it wasn't Mr. Disraeli, but you were a very interesting substitute. Now, thank you, Mr. Tebbit, to Nick Clark in the hall.
Where rather drier matters are being discussed. It's the second of two balloted motions this week, chosen by representatives out of the 846 originally put forward. It's on Sunday trading. The law relating to Sunday trading, it said, is confusing and often ignored. This conference calls upon Her Majesty's government to clarify the law as a matter of urgency. Now, this is an area which has caused the party some problems in the past. If you remember, in 1984, there was a report suggesting that all restrictions on Sunday trading should be abolished. The government proceeded to put a bill through Parliament, but it fell in April 1986. And the man who was Home Secretary, just become Home Secretary at the time, was Douglas Hurd. It was an embarrassing occasion because there was a three-line whip. 68 Conservative MPs decided that Sunday trading should not be allowed to go ahead in such an unrestrained fashion. Now, we shall be looking out in the speech of reply from one of his junior ministers, Timothy Renton, there he is, as to whether the government has any intention to try and push through this measure during the next session of Parliament. We don't know at the moment. The views will be anxiously awaited by those, for instance, who were pushing leaflets under my door this morning asking me to support Conservatives for Sunday trading.
It is the family which is the basic unit of our society, not the garden centre or the DIY store. And we owe it to our children to take every opportunity to preserve those traditions which strengthen home and family. By so doing, we will also teach them powerful lessons on our priorities and our values. Third, and most important of all, I would refer to the precedent of ancient statute. The pro-Sunday trading lobby referred to the Sunday Fairs Act of 1448, deriding it as a law for the Dark Ages. Well, I have an earlier law for the lobbyists, enacted centuries before 1448, and by an authority which I venture to suggest is higher than any we enjoy. And I make no apologies for quoting from its main provisions. It reads, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord, thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Madam Chairman, I do not believe that this law has ever been repealed, nor have I discovered any reference to suggest that the giver of that law has changed his mind. Now, I know that we are living in an age when even bishops no longer believe what they preach, but that is no reason for the Conservative Party to do likewise. We, of all people, have a responsibility and an obligation to uphold sacred traditions and cherished values. Our reforming zeal is tempered by our adherence to those traditions and to those values, and rightly so. It was Edmund Burke who declared, "When ancient opinions and rules of life are taken away, the loss cannot possibly be estimated. From that moment, we have no compass to govern us, nor can we know distinctly to what port we steer." Madam Chairman, I ask this conference to send a clear signal to the lobbyists and to the government. Don't sort out Sunday, save our Sundays.
We that speaker, David Baxter from Ipswich, echoing some of the slogans which developed during the campaign a year or so ago. Ipswich, one of the 12 Conservative gains during the last election.
Thank you very much, David, for your very moving contribution to this debate. Could I ask Stuart Money and Monica Drinkwater to be ready to speak? And now we have Asaf Mirza, who is a building contractor. He represents the Ilford South constituency and is a branch secretary, and he is to speak for the motion. Asaf Mirza.
Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I have been serving the Asian community for the last 25 years in London and especially in Ilford. I am fully confident that I can interpret their feelings and problems. I myself is in business for a long time in this country. I fully believe that the Conservative Party is the party of reality and can face the hard facts of life. I speak through my experiences as a whole, and especially for the 90% of Asian community, that the Sunday trading will eliminate lot of unemployment and induce incentive to the businesses. From London to Scotland, the Asian community businesses depend on Sunday trading. I believe this is their birthright to do business on any day of the week without any religious or political interference. If in any European country like France, a businessman enjoys Sunday trading, why not in the United Kingdom? Madam Chairman, at the same time, I would like to point out, without any hitch or hesitation, the fact that the high majority of Asian support Labour Party. And the reason, Madam Chairman, if you want to know, is that they think the Conservative Party has no time to think about Asian community. And once you pay a little heed towards solving their problems, I am almost certain that we can win back their support and sympathies once again. Let us give them permission and freedom to do business on Sundays, and let the action speak louder than the mere words. Thank you very much again, Madam Chairman, for offering me a chance to speak on this very special occasion, on this very special matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asaf Mirza, for a very special contribution. Could I ask Val Pulford to be ready to come to the rostrum? But now we have Councillor Richard Romaine, representing the Harrow East constituency. He is a retailer with his own family business and he is Chief Whip of the London Borough of Harrow. Richard Romaine, who is speaking against the motion.
Madam Chairman, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, Sunday trading affects three distinct groups. Firstly, the ecclesiastical community. Secondly, the shopper. And lastly, the retailer. The first group believe that Sunday is the Lord's day and are a well-motivated and good-intentioned group. But it is not for me, but for others more qualified to put their case and justify their argument. The second group, the shopper, demands to have the right to shop at any time, whilst the third group, the retailer, is obliged to serve the ever-increasing demands of the public. And it is as a member of the third group that I address conference today. My family and I are retailers. Retailers who have been established for generations. We recognize that not only are the public our customers, they are also our livelihood. But the public has only so much money to spend, and the cream on the cake can only be spread so far. Already one finds that the traditional half-day midweek closing has long since been eradicated, so that six-day trading is now the norm. Late closing on one or more days a week is quite common, so that now the retailer, in order to be competitive, is obliged to open for 11 or 12 hours a day on many of his business days. And bank holiday closing is now a complete farce. The small and not so small traditional retailer is threatened by the large multinational organizations who are buying up the high street and are happy, in the words of the TV program, to be open all hours. Well, my family and I believe many other traditional retailers, are not happy to be open all hours. It is difficult enough to get good staff, and when you do, they command, quite rightly, high salaries. Overheads are constantly increasing and eroding away profits, whilst to propose extended trading hours would offer nothing more than additional staff costs and overheads, so as to spread that cream on the cake just a little bit more thinly. The result is that the only people who can afford to open all hours are the large conglomerates. As we have heard earlier this morning from Hugh Lumby, Napoleon said that Britain was a nation of shopkeepers. Perhaps we were. But if we continue as we are, we will soon be a nation of shops owned by multinational keepers. I do not therefore support any review of Sunday trading laws. But we do have the ludicrous situation where one local authority steadfastly prosecutes Sunday trading offenders and the next turns a blind eye. So I earnestly suggest that uniformity is observed in enforcing the law as it now stands.
The man opposing the motion, which is supported by a number of pressure groups. One is called Sort Out Sunday. They did have an opinion poll done a few months ago, which showed, they said, that 3 out of 4 people in Britain are in favour of sorting out the chaotic Sunday trading laws. And when they say sort out, of course, they mean liberalising them.
Will be ours next time round, I have no doubt. He is a deputy chairman, and his occupation is that of a market gardener, and he is to speak for the motion. Stuart Money.
Madam Chairman, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, I am confused. I imagine many of you are also. Where do we stand in relation to the law? Commercial activity on Sundays has existed in various forms and in an increasing degree for many years. I recall all those years ago a corner shop in Bodmin It seemed to be open every evening and all Sunday. On what legal basis, I've no idea. Presumably none. Everyone seemed to accept it as fulfilling a local social need. There was certainly no attempt to stop it, not even by my own church, which was located almost next door. I'm sure you can all quote similar examples over the years. The bill to free Sunday trading was rejected. I expected the forces of law and order to move in to enforce the regulations in accordance with the democratically expressed wishes of Parliament. No such thing happened. A DIY firm at home was prosecuted for doing business on Sunday. The proprietor pleaded guilty, was fined, and declared he would carry on as before, which is what he did. I live in a tourist area with a short summer season. Who can blame people who look on Sunday as one more day on which to earn their living, whatever the actual nature of their business within the industry? There can be no argument about this resolution. The law does need urgent clarification. But I detect in the motion an intention to go further. Now, we all know, as has already been stated, that there can be no commercial activity without demand, without customers. The two complement each other. Just imagine what the effect would be on the tourist industry in Cornwall if the holidaymaker could not buy his ice cream or hire his surfboard just because it is Sunday. It's bad enough to have to take on the weather without the added obstacle of trading restrictions. Let me draw attention to my own situation and lifestyle. We come out of Mass on Sunday morning. I'm faced with running the gauntlet of special collections, the sale of raffle tickets, the auction of Harvest Festival produce, and other activities which I suggest do not equate to money changers in the temple.
Well, this motion on Sunday trading, one of two which emerged from a ballot of representatives, led to the original Sunday trading bill being thrown out by the Commons 18 months ago, reflected on the floor. We've had a series of speeches, 3 in favour of change, 3 in favour of retaining the status quo. And this current speaker is Monica Drinkwater from Cheltenham, who believes Sundays should be kept very much as they are.
Sunday is the one day of rest for most of us not involved in essential services. A day of respite from the pressures of the high street, and a day for many of us to keep as an opportunity for quiet renewal of our physical and spiritual resources. Let us leave it that way. Ladies and gentlemen, this should not be a party political issue, but please let us, the Conservative Party, again give the lead. Show we are a caring party. We care for families, their unity, their moral welfare and their freedom to enjoy their day of rest. Let us keep Sunday special.
Our next speaker, thank you very much indeed, Monica Drinkwater. Sadly, our next speaker has to be the last one in this debate. A debate which has produced 36 speaker slips. I do apologise for not calling more. There is no more time, but thank you. 36 uncalled speaker slips. I am so sorry. So we've had an even bigger response. But thank you very much for putting in so many slips. Now, Val Pulford is, of course, a county councillor. She represents North West Leicestershire. She puts on the speaker's slip that she is a housewife, a councillor, and a party hack. Val is to speak for the motion. Thank you, Val.
That's before. Chairman, conference, I speak in favour of this motion. This law is outdated and it is against everything that we as Conservatives hold dear. It perpetuates protectionism and it prevents freedom of choice in a free market. Let me illustrate. I was until recently chairman of my district council's Health and Housing Committee. And of course it's good old local government's job to enforce unworkable government legislation. We had a writ of mandamus against us from traders in a neighbouring area for dereliction in this matter. The result was that a Sunday market in our area, which enjoyed the benefits of planning permission, and from which the local town council was deriving income because it had privatised its market charter, and which the vast majority of the local electorate wanted, had to be closed, at great expense to them and to the benefit of the neighbouring traders. If that's not protectionism, I don't know what is. And of course, the officers were expected to work every Sunday to achieve it. The second issue I'd like to address is that of freedom. I have 3 sons who work in agriculture and horticulture, and often the only time they get off is on a Sunday between 10:30 and 4:30. Cows still need milking, and the chickens still lay their eggs, and the plants still need watering. They find it impossible to shop, and I have to do it for them, and I always get it wrong. We expect our food in the shops on Monday and our milk on the doorstep on Sunday, but we deny the worker who achieves this for us the freedom to do their shopping. When this was last debated in Parliament, it was rejected because of a very vociferous but powerful minority, including the bishops and the established church. But maybe a little healthy competition and a little less protectionism in their direction might concentrate their minds and drag them into the 20th century. Leicestershire, we are a cosmopolitan and multicultural society, and it's someone's holy day on every day of the week. But the temples are still full on Friday, and that's a shopping day, and the synagogue's still full on Saturday, and that's a shopping day. Perhaps if Sunday was a shopping day, the church and chapels might be full. It works in Scotland. Let's do what we promised. Let's look at this outdated and unworkable law, and let's roll back the frontiers of freedom even further and abolish it.
Well, Councillor Val Pulford from northwest Leicester has obviously touched a chord there, a very rare standing ovation from the floor. Speaking about the traditional conservative values of freedom and the need to express them by allowing people to act as they will on Sunday, and pointing out that every day of the week is a holy day for somebody.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, whether you agree with Val Pulford's sentiments or whether you don't, I'm sure we're all unanimous in the thought that that was a super contribution to this debate. But of course, I would like to thank all contributors to this debate. They've all put their cases, whether they be for or against, in a very clear and concise manner, and we thank you all. And now it is my pleasure to ask our reply speaker, Mr. Timothy Renton, to address us. Now, he has been involved in international commerce and trade for a number of years, before being elected Member of Parliament for Mid-Sussex in 1974. Following various parliamentary appointments, he became in June Minister of State at the Home Office. And that is why he is here with us this morning to reply to the debate on this balloted motion. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Timothy Renton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm very pleased that you, the representatives, chose this motion as one of your choices in the ballot. And I'm very pleased for many reasons. First, because if you hadn't, I wouldn't be speaking to you from the platform now. And I can tell you that after many years of sending up speakers' slips myself as a representative, hoping to catch the chairman's eye, there are several advantages being up here. First, you know you're going to be called, and when, and then, unlike Val Pulford just now, you don't have the great worry that the chairman is going to cut you off just as you're getting to your last and best point. I'm delighted to welcome to the platform, apart from my boss, Douglas Hurd, and many ministerial colleagues, Jean Trumpington. Some of you will know that she piloted her own bill in favor of deregulation through the Lords a few years ago, and she feared very much that she would be struck down, as she said, by a fiery bolt for pointing out how many cathedral shops sold goodies on Sundays. She even discovered that Canterbury Cathedral was offering a guide in their shop entitled Pubs in Kent, compiled by Campaign for Real Ale. An argument that would appeal to Stuart money. But much more seriously, Madam Chairman, I welcome this debate because the question simply of putting common sense into the issue of Sunday trading is unfinished business as far as the Conservative Party is concerned. And we take both our Sundays and our shopping rights very seriously. This has been a very sensible and good-humoured debate, but I have no hesitation in accepting and recommending to conference the motion ably, wisely moved and moderately by Martin Punja. And incidentally, you should know that he fought Joan Ruddock, ex-chairperson of CND, at the last election and got the highest Tory vote in Lewisham, Deptford, in living memory. Now, as many speakers have said, why do I support this motion? The fact is that the present law on Sunday trading is a mess of irreconcilable contradictions. It's a mess, and when the law is in such a mess, it makes itself into an ass. And I don't think Tories should ever rest easy when a law is transparently flouted and its anomalies make it indefensible. Now, as this debate and the speeches, moving speeches by David Baxter and Azza Mirza showed us, the issue of Sunday trading is, of course, emotive and difficult. But doing nothing is not a responsible or realistic option. There must be reform. There must be reform, and as a party and government, we do not shrink from doing what is necessary just because it is hard. The status quo is not an option for us. But let us accept also that the issue of Sunday trading does represent a paradox and a dilemma for Conservatives. On the one hand, we are, of course, the party of deregulation. We rightly stress our commitment to extending freedom of choice and getting rid of unnecessary bureaucracy and red tape. It is our zeal for extending choice which gives impetus to our radical new reforms in education and rented housing. But does it not also then follow that people should be allowed to choose how to spend their Sundays? But we are also the party of tradition, and as Monica Drinkwater said, of the family, of respect for time-honored values, and certainly the party which sees the biggest role for the churches in upholding the framework of our society. We started our conference with a religious service, and only 2 days ago, Kenneth Baker was emphasizing that religious education must be provided in all our schools. So how do we, as the party of government, resolve this paradox? I can't provide a final answer to that this morning, but I want to point some possible way forward. I stress the absolute necessity of taking action to end the present absurdity, but I am also sure of the need, in tackling the issue again, to listen for a while before finally deciding how to proceed. We have some thoughts, but we want to find a way forward which avoids whipping up the disproportionate heat which accompanied the debates on the shops bill. Let me rehearse very briefly to you how the argument over Sunday shopping has developed. That it has been an issue of continuing public interest is shown by the fact that no less than 13 private members' bills, including Jean Trumpington's, to reform the Shops Act, were introduced between 76 and our own shops bill in 85. The government's bill was based in the main on the recommendations of an independent committee, the Old Committee. They reached two principal conclusions. First, that the current law was manifestly in disrepute. But second, that it was questionable whether the criminal law should be involved in preventing shopping on Sundays at all. Furthermore, they could identify no consistent principle to underpin regulation. Therefore, they opted for total deregulation as the only practical solution. Now, the interesting thing is that the House of Commons endorsed the terms of this committee's report in May 85 by 304 votes to 184, a majority of 120. But our shops bill, a year later, based on the same report, was lost by 10 votes, including many Tory votes, as John Wakeham remembers well. Now, why was that? Above all, this was due to the views of those concerned for the traditional character of Sunday, some of whose views we have heard very eloquently expressed this morning. The weight of our postbags and of passionate meetings in our constituencies paid eloquent tribute to the depth of feeling on this point. Now, I certainly accept that any new proposal must take some account of this depth of concern. As I said at the beginning, we are a party philosophically and constitutionally well equipped to respond to that concern. But I must also put the other side of the argument. We must all, and here I speak for the churchgoer, and as one of those churchgoers myself, we must all acknowledge that ours is no longer a majority way of life on Sunday. I agree with Stuart Money. There is nothing in my book inconsistent or irreligious about both going to worship on a Sunday morning or to evensong and visiting a shop or garden centre. 4 million people already work regularly on Sunday. 9 million work from time to time on Sunday. Now, I happen to be lucky enough to enjoy a fairly traditional Sunday. Last Sunday, actually, I was reading the Old Testament lesson in our church at home, 1 Kings 17, the bit about Elijah breathing life back into the widow's son. But should I seek to prevent others who wish to spend their Sundays differently from so doing, the church surely can never rely for its strength on forcing others to do what they do not want to do. Or on stopping them following any innocent pursuits they wish. As a Christian, what right have I to impose my judgments or decisions on other people? As Charles Dickens said, you cannot make people religious by Act of Parliament or force them to church by constable. We must recognize that tastes and lifestyles have become more diverse. We should allow scope for more individual choice on Sunday too. And what would be the consequence of extending such choice? Would Sunday as a day of respite be really destroyed? Consider the experience of the Scots, hardly an irreligious nation, nor a population of wanton Sabbath breakers. I know, I'm married to one of them. North of the border, there are virtually no restrictions on Sunday opening, but most people would agree that it is still perfectly possible to enjoy a traditionally peaceful Sunday there. There is no suggestion that church attendance has been hit by shops opening on Sunday. There is no groundswell of support for reimposing controls on Sunday opening. One of the reasons for that may be that less than 1 in 5 of Scottish shops was actually found to be open in '85 on Sundays anyway. Malcolm Rifkin told me the other day that at the heat of our controversy about Sunday opening, the beginning of last year, he got a letter from a constituent who wrote to him saying, if Scotland gets Sunday trading, I'll never vote Conservative again. Malcolm replied that there had been no restrictions on Sunday trading in Scotland for years, and she hadn't noticed. I suspect that if we had full Sunday trading, after all the fuss had died down, our reaction would be much the same. There will be no demand for all shops to open, so they will not do so. And I would therefore say to David Baxter, Sunday will remain a special day, deregulation or no, because the majority of us want it that way. So, where do we go from here? I think that the proposal for removing controls on shopping hours contained in the shops bill was the best way forward. I don't believe it would have destroyed the traditional character of Sunday, so I don't rule out the possibility that after we have thought through all the other options and listened to the arguments, we may return to the deregulation of shop trading hours envisaged by the old committee and in the bill. But it is worth looking at possible compromises and asking, are they workable? Are they sensible? Are they enforceable? Are they rational? Now, I'm certain that there is no joy in looking at a limited reform of the present Shops Act based on replacing one random list of goods which it is legal to sell on Sundays with another. Martin Panya and Hugh Lumby both rehearsed the anomalies amusingly during this debate. My own favorite is that there is nothing you can do legally if your rabbit or budgie runs out of food on Sunday, but your mule is luckier. You can go to any inn and buy fodder for it. These inconsistencies are the source of much innocent amusement, but of course that's hardly what one expects from the law. And the 1950 Act was written before the days of mixed retailing made the law unenforceable. Any list approach would suffer the same fate, and I can really see no merit in calling in the criminal law to deal with a shopkeeper for selling one kind of good but not another, when it is perfectly legal to sell both 6 days a week. To protect the small business, and here I think of the arguments of Richard Romaine, it has been suggested that only shops with, say, 3,000 square feet of floor area or 6 employees should be allowed to trade. But a floor space threshold would be a nightmare to enforce. Clearly, larger shops would put up partitions for Sunday trading, and just like Martin Panya, I can imagine the scenes as local government inspectors walked round from shop to shop, checking regularly that the partitions hadn't been moved, and tripping over old ladies and strangling small dogs with their tape measures as they went about their work. And is it really sensible to encourage medium-sized shop owners to sack staff in order to qualify for opening on Sunday? Would it be right to penalize a successful shop which wanted to boost employment? Of course not. Any such scheme would open the law to ridicule once more and must be rejected. Now, there are, therefore, almost endless types of regulation which could be invented. But there seem to me to be only 2 other possible options. First is, and this has been mentioned, to deregulate for only part of Sunday. This is an approach adopted by some American states. It is simple, workable, and enforceable. But of course it wouldn't be popular with the churches if trading were only allowed on Sunday morning, and if opening was restricted to the afternoon. What happens to all those goods like newspapers that people have been used to buying for years on Sunday mornings? Now, there are clearly drawbacks, but it is at least worth keeping the idea of limited hours on a list of possible options. Now, second, and here I make it quite clear that I am kite flying, what I have in mind is that we might at central government level totally deregulate Sunday trading, but then leave it to the local authority to decide whether Sunday is a full opening day. No, wait. Well, that's very interesting already to see what's happened to that kite. One of the purposes of kite flying. But let me just put it to you that the local authority, in making their decisions about a full opening day or partially so, they would, of course, have to respond to the wishes of their ratepayers and shopkeepers. Of course, if they decided to restrict opening hours, enforcement would cost money, and there would be inconsistencies and variations from district to district. But
well, it's clear that the government is ready to try again with the shops bill, which was so...
In the Empress Ballroom of the Winter Gardens, Blackpool. We are at the Conservative Party conference, and they're in one of their final debates of the week on party policy and organisation. And the chairman of the party, Norman Tebbit, who is on the platform, will be replying. Perhaps, who knows, he won't say, perhaps his last conference speech. And behind him, on the platform, is Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, come to hear her husband again. She goes around in a wheelchair and goes to parties and has enjoyable conversation with people, but she's still a little frail, has difficulty in raising a glass and in waving, but she enjoys it very much indeed, and she keeps very cheerful. And Norman Tebbit will be replying to this debate very shortly. Now to the rostrum.
Whilst you're all here celebrating, I come from Leicester, where we lost 2 seats. In Leicester, we now have 3 Labour members of Parliament. And it is a mystery. It is a mystery that I'm appealing for help about tonight. Because in Leicester, we have between 25 and 28% Asian voters. And yet we have 3 Labour members of Parliament. This I can't understand. The Muslims believe passionately in single-sex education. They don't want their girls to go to a boys' school. They believe passionately in single-sex education. And then rush out and vote for a party which gives no choice in education whatsoever? I can't understand it. And everyone knows that most of the Muslims come from Pakistan. And the story around Leicester is that Pakistan will not be allowed to enter the World Cup because every time the referee gives them a corner, they build a shop on it. And yet they rush out and vote for a party which will not give them less rates. They want to put the rates up on their corner shops as high as possible. I can't understand it. And the Sikhs in Leicester, they passionately believe in family life. You don't see the Sikhs pushing Granny into an old folks' home. They look after her. A girl I know, a Sikh girl I know, left her husband only a few weeks ago, and both families were round trying to get them together to sort it out. Not hard lines, your marriage has gone wrong. Come on, let's get the family together. Let's see what we can do about keeping the family together. And yet, they go out and vote for a party which is in favor of lesbians and homosexuals. I can't understand it. And finally, the vast majority of Leicester are Hindus. The Hindus who came from East Africa. The Hindus who came, the business community of East Africa. The Hindus who are giving us a business community in Leicester. It's wonderful to go down Belgrave. It is really wonderful. You see shops, an absolute blaze of color, the finest saris in the world outside Asia. You see the center of the Indian gold outside Asia. There is a business community in Leicester of Hindus who promptly rush out and vote for the party who doesn't give a damn about small business. Why? My plea to the conference, my plea to you, Mr. Chairman, is please, will you help us find the answer to these questions? Because in Leicester, we have a 27% Asian vote, a vote which is naturally conservative, with both a small c and a large c. They are our votes, and they have been stolen from us by a party which has just been like a ventriloquist dummy saying, Labour's for Asians, Labour's for Asians, Labour's for Asians, Labour's for Asians. They are not, sir. We are for the Asian community. Please help us to advertise that. We need help because we have the right message. And please don't say we're doing nothing ourselves. In Belgrave, we have 3 Sikhs and 4 Hindus on our committee.
Mr. Derek Harrison Price from East Leicester asking Norman Tebbit to find the answers to the question of why the Asians, even though they're natural conservatives in Mr. Harrison Price's view, why the Asians vote for the Labour Party, which believes in homosexuality and lesbianism and doesn't give a damn about small businesses. See whether Mr. Tebbit provides the answer to that interesting question. Now we have Mr. David Morgan from Shrewsbury.
But it is too imprecise, although I cannot dissent from the general sentiment. For although we have won a 3rd term of office with a big majority, it would be folly to blithely assume that we have become the natural party of government. In 1991 or 1992, the Labour Party may well be better prepared and more formidable than in 1987. We may indeed have to contend with Mr. Brian Gould, so often mentioned this week as Labour leader rather than Mr. Kinnock. And an electoral pact, dare I say it, between the Labour Party and a new merged party may be a fact. At local level, where the Labour Party is still a strong force, we must continue the process at national level, where we have broken into traditional Labour heartlands. Labour still think of many wards and areas as theirs as of right. If we accept this, we are wrong, because every ward is winnable, no matter how long it takes. In Shrewsbury in May '86, by hard work and effort, with a splendid candidate, we achieved one of the few Conservative gains of a poor local election nationally in an area that was thought for years to be a safe Labour fiefdom. This shows, Madam Chairman, that it can be done and it must be done. Again, locally, a common complaint and problem is that our candidates and workers aren't adequately briefed on local and national issues. We require good and up-to-date material, particularly on education reform and the community charge. But we also need to make ourselves more aware of local issues by buttonholing our councillors, by asking questions, by attending council meetings. The two above policies, education reform and the community charge, are drastic and they are radical. And you can be sure that our opponents, especially the Labour Party, will go to any length to distort them. Therefore, it is all the more important that we take the initiative locally. Why should the opposition parties always make the running? For goodness sake, if a local controversy is brewing, get onto local radio and television, write to the newspapers, explain the Conservative position. This can be coordinated. In Shropshire, a group of correspondents have been highly effective in rebutting the arguments of CND. Nationally, a few brief points. The electorate do not want to be patronised or underestimated, and I don't think they want too much US-style razzmatazz. Public relations is important, but it is no substitute for reasoned, coherent political argument. Secondly, we must try to appeal to the common interest, the national interest, not sectional interest. I'm rather sceptical of specific appeals to particular sectional interests, however we define them. For example, blatant youth campaigning by the Labour Party didn't do much for them in June. Indeed, we still gained, I think the exact figure was some 36.5% to 37% of the youth vote. Labour didn't have a substantial lead over us in this respect. Thirdly, I joined the Conservative and Unionist Party. And I hope we shall always be the Conservative and Unionist Party. We did badly in Wales and Scotland. We must secure the confidence of Wales and Scotland, and indeed Northern Ireland. We must not write them off. We must not take them for granted. We do this at our peril and at Britain's peril. As a word of warning, Mr. Chairman, our policies, I don't think, command enough support. We must be constantly vigilant in this respect, even among those who voted for us.
David, can you wind up, please?
On the health service, on law and order, on the community charge, we have a yawning credibility gap to close, and close fast. I know that the health service is safe in our hands. You know the health service is safe in our hands, but I'm not sure if a majority of the electorate yet know it's safe in our hands, and that is something we must put right.
Thank you very much indeed, David. After Denise Holloway, I will call James Howe, who sadly will have to be the last speaker. Denise Holloway comes from Wales. She's a sales associate with an insurance company and a mother of 4 children.
Madam Chairman, Conference. When considering the motion, I wondered whether in fact there could be any debate. We all applaud our third successive election victory and acknowledge the commitment to policies by the government and the careful planning orchestrated by our party chairman, Norman Tebbit, which have made this possible. What has been achieved since Margaret Thatcher took office has been quite remarkable in that almost single-handed she has succeeded in changing attitudes in the country. And this has been done by the implementation of policies which the conference has been applauding all week: home ownership for council tenants, denationalisation and increased share ownership amongst the population, improved training facilities for the young unemployed, stabilisation of the economy, lower taxation. I could go on and on. At the last election, not only was there no contest due to the appalling disarray and hypocrisy of the opposition parties, but the election result, I believe, was really decided prior even to the commencement of the campaign. Granted, we all enjoyed the spectacle of Glenys and Neil strolling hand in hand on their cliff walk, meeting all Neil Kinnock's aunties and uncles, and the two Davids like some dreadful double acts, smiling as they completed one another's sentences. The slick election broadcasts of the Socialist and Alliance parties were, to put it mildly, an insult to British good common sense. In Britain, we are quite a sophisticated, laid-back kind of people, and apparently very easily able to separate fact from fiction. And the people of Britain, under Margaret Thatcher, have come to recognise that whilst there are still problem areas, by and large she has done a pretty good job. The people of Britain feel, I think, very safe under her leadership and proud of the improved status of our country, engineered by the Prime Minister, who has developed into a statesman of international recognition. The motion calls for a broader base of appeal, but I do think that this has already been achieved. Whilst canvassing, all of us will have recognised that the voting pattern has indeed changed. Council estates house very many Conservatives now, and in fact it is often the professional classes who have dallied with the alliance. To be fair, a lot of caring people did for a short time allow themselves to be hoodwinked by Messrs. Owen and Steele. Their supporters tended to be the people who were concerned over such things as social issues, the decline of traditional industries in the north, and the purported north-south divide. However, there is no magic instant solution to the problems that have evolved with the changing world we live in. And this is what good government is all about: moving with the times, not being afraid to introduce dramatic policies to assist this process of social evolution. We now have the situation where even the Labour Party is contemplating deserting socialist policies in a vain attempt to modernise their party and steal victory at some time in the future. As our party chairman so rightly said this week, it is scandalous and undemocratic that there is no effective opposition whilst the Labour Party undergoes its fabulous metamorphosis. And to think that they honestly believe that the electorate can listen to their confessions of failure and acknowledgement that their policies have been unacceptable and will have to be changed to be more in line with conservatism perhaps, and not see the hypocrisy. How desperate they are for power, power at any price. And what do they think that they will possibly have to offer that we, with possibly 15 years of government experience immediately behind us, cannot improve on? There was a time not so long ago in politics when, come a general election, all but the totally committed and party faithful liked to change for change's sake. But not now, not since Margaret Thatcher, for she has done a very good job through her incredible single-mindedness to illustrate to all of us on which side our bread is buttered. No, we must not rest on our laurels, but with this very full agenda over the next 4 years and our plan for action, I do not believe there is much danger of that. And the only danger, as I see it, is how we as Conservatives portray ourselves.
I think you can't see the red light has come on. Your papers are over the top.
Oh, so sorry, I'm missing it.
So if you can wind up quickly.
Yes, half a minute, yes. Is how we as Conservatives portray ourselves at grassroots level. I do not believe that the government will falter, but how we as Conservatives appear to the unconverted is of vital importance. We must be seen as caring of the less fortunate in our society.
I think you're not going to have time to finish that, so if you could just make this the last sentence.
Yes. The new Conservative Party is the party that cares, the party of the working classes, for that is what we all are. And this should be our message. It is our duty to put this caring across, and the rest we can leave to Mrs. Thatcher and her very able team. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And a good-natured applause there for a representative who just wouldn't be bullied by the timekeepers, and how much sympathy one has with her. And we have another speaker from the rostrum now.
And Vice Chairman of the local party.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You probably think I'm going to speak about Scotland, but I'm going to speak about the UK. We are a national party. We require national policies. We, the Scottish Conservative Party, just now are peddling soft socialism. You could be mistaken for thinking we're the SDP. Perhaps, maybe that's why we did so bad in Scotland. We require strong, radical, conservative policies put over to the electorate of this country. We require this party to stand in every seat in Great Britain and in Northern Ireland, including the 17 seats in Northern Ireland are not represented by the Conservative Party. The people in Northern Ireland cannot even join the Conservative Party. This must change. They should have their democratic right to vote for or against the British government, their Prime Minister, which are denied the right to do so by the Conservative Party, by their failure to put up candidates in Northern Ireland. But in Scotland, we suffer from several problems. They think we are an English party. We are not. We are not English, we are not Scottish, we are British. This is a British party. We must put over British policies to both the electorates of Scotland, Northern Ireland, England and Wales. We must go further into more radical policies, including the housing schemes, the water authorities, education, the health service. We need more privatisation in Scotland. We need strong Thatcherite policies. In Scotland, we wish to see an end to the soft socialist policies put over by our Conservative Party. Our Conservative leaders have not given the Scottish people the right lead to go. We must put over strong, hard, Conservative policies with more privatisation to boost the party in Scotland and raise the pride of the Scottish people to the pride of the British people. Even better, we should phase out Scottish policies and just have British policies. One Britain, one nation, and one Conservative Party. Thank you.
The chairman of the party, Norman Tebbit, will now respond to this debate on policy and organisation. Perhaps it is his last conference speech as party chairman. Many people think it is. It was expected that he might announce his retirement from the post here in this speech, but this is now thought unlikely because the Prime Minister hasn't made up her mind who to appoint. But we shall see. Norman Tebbit.
Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, this debate started very well with what I thought was an excellent speech from Christopher Fraser. And it went on from there. And I hope my own speech will justify the reception which you've just given me. Not too easy twice a week, you know. And I know that you all must have particularly enjoyed Nick St. Aubyn's speech, and particularly would like to wish him well in putting right that little error which occurred at Truro so recently. You know, when I went to Central Office 2 years ago, I found that I had come into a most splendid inheritance from John Gummer and Cecil Parkinson and many earlier chairmen. And that inheritance was not the building, nor the offices. It was the people who work in Central Office and the vast experience of electioneering which they share. I can't mention them all by name, but I must express my thanks, and I'm sure yours too, to every one of them. Not least some of those who are on the platform today, not least Sir Anthony Garner, John Lacey, Roger Bowden, Harvey Thomas, Chris Lawson and John Desborough, and of course, my Deputy Chairman Peter Morrison, Vice Chairman Tom Arnold and Jim Spicer, and my former Vice Chairman, who did a great job, Geoffrey Finsberg, Hal Miller, and of course Emma Nicholson, now a Member of Parliament too. But I should say there's a name missing there. The ammunition which you fired during the election campaign was moulded above all by an outstanding group who were led by Robin Harris, the Director of Research of Central Office, one of the key people in that building and one of the best directors of CRD that we have ever had since the end of the war. Seldom did anyone successfully challenge a fact which we put forward, and that was because they'd already been challenged by Robin, and he didn't let us get away with anything, I can tell you that. Then, of course, there were the Saatchi team and my former Chief of Staff, Michael Dobbs, and we were all served by a most remarkable secretarial team in my office, the tireless and ever-loyal Shirley Oxenbury and Alex Mennell. We owe such people a great debt. They all work longer hours than they should for less money than they ought to have. Indeed, Shirley and Alex were particularly good secretaries. They took out from my file my speech of last year. So being a man of a naturally cautious turn of mind, whilst preparing for this speech, I reread what I said last year. You know, I was tempted to simply make the same speech again. Just changing the tense from the future to the past, from we will win to we did win. So I can say, as I did last year, I've got no difficulty in accepting this motion. It is no time to rest on our laurels. Our opponents are at the moment divided, broken, and confused. There is no better time to press home the attack, and we've already been doing just that. Since the 11th of June, there has been a flush of local authority by-elections. Of our seats, we've held 34. Sadly, we've lost 6, but we've gained 19. Labour has held 38 of its. They've lost 11, and gained only 4. And the Alliance has held only 5. It's lost 10 and gained 7. Now, we want to do better. But as many of you will know, we did do better just yesterday, because one of those gains came late last night in the Tudor ward of Kingston, when our candidate, Laurie Lee, won the seat from the Liberals, and that returned the control of the London Borough of Kingston to us.
Conservative win in that by-election was 13.5% to the Tories.
And there is Laurie Lee. He and his agent, Linda Dunn, came up this morning to enjoy this conference with us and to make the point, to underline the point, I think, that Mr. Newman made, that it's quality candidates who become successful candidates. Congratulations, Laurie. And I'd add that he was the campaign manager in the St. James Ward by-election in July, when we took a seat off the Liberals to rob them of their majority. Those by-election victories, and those still to come, are beginning to build up to the local elections of 1988. Then the district elections will be followed by both county and European elections in 1989, the 10th anniversary of the Prime Minister coming into office. And then the London boroughs in 1990, all continuing with the build-up for our 4th general election win in well, we don't have to start speculating about the date just yet. You see, general elections aren't won in a matter of 4 weeks. The British people are not so stupid as to forget 4 or 8, let alone 12 or 13 years of achievement. Nor would they forget years of failure and simply make a decision on 4 weeks' festival of promises. I'm not going to give you a post-mortem on our election campaign. After all, it wasn't this party that died, was it? But it is worth remembering both how and why we won. Our victory in this May and June was solidly based on the achievements of the 2 chancellors, Geoffrey Howe and Nigel Lawson, who steered our economy from humiliating weakness to internationally recognized strength. And not being one of them now, I can say, and a supporting cast of ministers who've brought order to industrial relations, who've extended home ownership, who've strengthened our defences, both against potential aggressors from abroad and criminals here at home, who've improved public transport, improved the health service, who've liberated a dozen underperforming state-controlled businesses, and done much more besides. But above all, our victory was based on the achievement of our Prime Minister in transforming Britain from an object of sympathy from our friends and derision from our rivals to a nation that has won respect, admiration, and now that most sincere form of flattery, imitation throughout the world, even possibly penetrating to Walworth Road. Of course, we could have lost an election despite all that. There was a time early in 1986 when it looked as though we might. During the first half of last year, we were in third place in the polls more often than first. To the public, we looked like a government which had lost its way and lost its authority. And that's how a government can lose its majority. Yet below that froth of commotion, the economy was strong, unemployment was on the turn, inflation under control. And despite all the commotion rocking the boat, the Prime Minister held firmly on course. And she was right, because the failure was, above all, of the government's public presentation, not a failure of our policies. So our task wasn't to change our policies, nor to conceal our record, but to ensure that the record was clear and the policies were understood. And we had to ensure that the record and the policies of the other parties were clear and understood too. I never believed that Labour was likely to take many votes from us. They were most likely to gain through the defection of Tory voters to the alliance, letting in Labour by the back door. So I decided to attack the weakest opposition party and the one most likely to take votes from us, the alliance. And the turning point in the fortunes of the alliance, from which they never recovered, was our campaign in 1986, a campaign in which we exposed the deep policy divisions between the SDP and the Liberal partners. We arranged polls of alliance candidates which demonstrated those divisions to the public. More important, for the first time they brought the members of the two parties to realize that the divisions between them were too deep to be bridged. And they lit the fuse of the alliance self-destruct system, which exploded to such effect earlier this year. I remember at the time our celebration at Central Office of the 10th anniversary of the last Lib-Lab Pact caused some surprise. Some called it a thoughtless outburst of political aggro that would strengthen, not weaken, the alliance. Well, I think the critics were proved wrong. Political tides take time to change. And even as late as 12 months ago, when, according to the political writers, Mr. Kinnock had had a good conference, we'd still not broken through to a decisive lead in the polls. But the tide turned at our Bournemouth conference when we launched the slogan, "The next move forward," and we moved forward in the polls. That slogan, that conference, the policies, the milestones, the targets we set out, gave the government the radical, reforming, positive image. An image that was all the stronger because it reflected the reality. From then on, we maintained the positive approach, and we led with positive policies throughout the election campaign. But of course, elections aren't won just on the national scene. They're not fought entirely on television, in the national press, and at Westminster. They're fought in the constituencies, the wards, the polling booths, the polling districts, and on the doorsteps of the homes of individual voters. Last year, I told you, we'd begun an audit to identify those seats which might be lost or won in a hard-fought election. That audit was the intelligence on which we based our plan to strengthen our organization and political muscle where it mattered most. I've got no intention of helping our opponents by saying just what we did and where, but I can say that we identified about 110 seats on which we could concentrate our resources and effort. We won over 80 of those seats, and we scored some notable victories. Fulham, Rydale, Isle of Wight, Portsmouth South, Cambridge North East. I can go on. Let's relish our wins for a moment. Stockton South, Colne Valley, Wolverhampton North East Borough. And especially sweet because it was the next constituency to mine, Walthamstow too. So our campaign in the tactical seats was successful. So much so that we've begun the work on a new provisional audit to identify where we can achieve the most effective return on the resources which we can deploy between now and the next election. Now, you'll remember that it was in the light of the local election results that the Prime Minister launched the final stage of our election campaign on the 11th of May. By then, I was confident of success, and my confidence was never shaken during the campaign, even though we had to move swiftly at times to maintain our lead. Our manifesto was right. We identified the key issues. They came forward at the times of our choosing, and as we planned, so the campaign ran. We planned the pace, the weight, and the direction of the campaign, and it increased to reach a peak as we moved on to our strongest ground in the key last 7 days before polling. And we tailored our campaign to appeal not to the media. Labour aimed for the media. They missed the voters. We aimed for the voters, and we got the voters. I'm not sure who the two Davids aimed for, but they got the bird. Mr. Kinnock's friends say Labour had the best campaign. I doubt it, but well, so what? We had the best result. And if the proof of the pudding is in the eating, the majority of 101 was just what the Prime Minister ordered. Indeed, as you now know, half the Labour Party is now half intent on half-heartedly adopting half of our policies. They've gone further. They've saluted our campaign with their new slogan, "Moving Ahead," having borrowed half of last year's conference theme too. As far as I'm concerned, they can have half as many seats as we do too. But enough of the past. This is a conference about the future. Over great swathes of the country, the Labour Party has been comprehensively defeated, but it still has an enormous power base in both local government and in many of our great cities. We must now be planning our assault on those last bastions of the Labour Party. Of course, once again, the ammunition for our campaign will be provided from our policies for the revival of our decayed city centres and suburbs, and for better education and housing. But it's the party that must fire the ammunition, and straight at the target too. Of course, we must maintain our strength in the areas we hold, but we must strengthen our forces for the assault on Labour's last strongholds. Already, reorganisation and reinforcement is going on apace in Scotland, where I know that James Howe will be pleased to know that the Edinburgh Central Office has been strengthened, and I'm sure that any traces of damp in the structure will be dried out by the warmth of that new organisation. And here in England and in Wales, we're assessing our strengths in the major towns and cities. I'm convinced that we should encourage the formation of groupings of constituencies within natural political boundaries. For example, within London boroughs and in the cities, where many, like Birmingham, already have powerful joint organisations with a city agent and a coordinating group to ensure we speak with a single voice. Others are following suit, some like Plymouth, where I opened the new city headquarters just a month or so ago. Others still lack either the conviction or the resources to launch such organizations. In some cases, we can help to generate one or the other or both, but we will not use compulsion nor long-term subsidy to force the pace. I think it's politically right to organize on the basis which makes sense to the voters. After all, they're often more sure of the city or borough in which they live than the precise constituency. What's more, it usually makes financial strength too. And groups of constituencies working together can provide both the enhanced responsibilities and the financial strength which can offer our best professional agents an attractive alternative career path to the area office route, which is the only way forward for them at the moment if they have ambitions to get on farther in the party structure. So much is going on. Of course, it all costs money. That means we must improve our ability to direct our spending to today's priorities. And indeed, we are currently reforming and reorganizing in central office the whole of our accounting, budgetary and financial control procedures, just to that end. We mustn't continue spending on activities for no better reason than that we've always done so in the past. It also means that we must use every proper and sensible means to raise money. That does include direct mail. Direct mail is a communication tool. Many of the thousands of people who respond to our direct mail have never before been approached by the Conservative Party. Many are so touched that they send us money. Many say they wish to become members of the party, but they don't know where to go to join. So we pass their names to you. So far, some 25,000 names in the past 12 months. I hope you've recruited every one of them. For as Gerald Gillen and Brian Newman reminded us, a party that does not recruit new members will not be the party of the strength that we need to finally defeat Labour. Next week, over 500,000 people will receive letters from me. Most will never have had a letter from the party before. They will be told, I don't want them to stop giving locally, but I do want them to give me some extra too. I'll be asking them to give money for a new team, not in central office, but one which will be out in the country, fighting in your constituencies, working with you and offering you their help. That team will be equipped with transport, portable computers and printers, and above all, dedicated and professional staff. And if that appeal is successful, I hope the new unit will be up and running in the new year. Madam Chairman, was the day when Labour could take manual workers and the council housing estates and trades unionists for granted. Today they still take Scotland and the North for granted. I want to take them by surprise again, moving deeper into their traditional ground. We'll let the people know that with us they have a choice in education and a choice in housing. We'll show them there's a local Conservative Party that's active and working for them. Many of Labour's so-called traditional voters have changed their allegiance as they've prospered, bought their council houses and their shares, and begun to share in the good things of life. And more will do so as those good things are spread more widely. That is how we've become a party, speaking for every class and creed, but never class-ridden nor sectarian. And we won't just attack in Labour's strongest seats, no, in all the seats which we have to hold next time to maintain or increase our majority, there's a great deal of work to be done. As Derek Harrison Price so wittily reminded us this morning, we lost some seats we should have held, where ethnic minority votes went to Labour, despite the fact that many of those voters are natural conservatives sharing our views. You know, English council tenants used to do the same. So as David Morgan said, we have a major job to do, but not by pandering to each sectional interest, but by showing that the national interest which we pursue is the interest of every section of this country too. So you'll see that I see the party as a campaigning organisation, as the motion asks, a crusading organisation. And we're all members of that crusade. Only a couple of weeks ago, the Prime Minister and I were in Berlin. Jim Spicer was there indeed too with us, at the International Democratic Group Leaders Conference. It was my first visit to Berlin, and I stood at a window of the Reichstag building and watched as the Prime Minister, Chancellor Kohl, and other leaders laid a wreath at the foot of the Berlin Wall to commemorate the Germans who have been murdered by the border guards of socialist East Germany. I could see down into the strip of land between the eastern and the western walls, barren, bare, except for the watchtowers and the armed guards. The armed guards that are needed to keep East Germans in their socialist paradise. I can't describe what I felt. It was a feeling of infinite sadness, a grief that a regime could do such things to its own people, and a deep sense of gratitude that I'd had the fortune to have been born here in Britain, and a profound thankfulness that Western Europe is not only free and prosperous, but that it has torn down the walls which once divided us and has replaced them with bridges and with bonds which bind us together. We can be proud. We can be proud that our people are held not by prison walls and armed guards, but by the stronger ties of common values, above all a love of freedom. Those values, that love of freedom, are not unique to conservatives, but they are shared by every conservative. Our opponents, with a few wild exceptions, do not want to destroy those values or lose that freedom, but they no longer know how to nurture them. It's not that they want to throw them away, but they no longer have the courage nor the will to defend them. For Britain to be again what it has so often been in the past, the upholder, sometimes alone, of the values which are now common to us all in the Western world, is for me a matter of great pride. And it is this party and this government that has enabled Britain to get back to that place in the world which we should never have lost. That was our crusade. That is our crusade. And it must go on, and on, and on.
They liked that last quotation from Margaret Thatcher during the election. and they're giving him another standing ovation. Norman Tebbit, chairman of the Conservative Party. Was that his last speech as party chairman? Most of them think it is. But we'll hear later this month, perhaps, if he's going to be replaced. And who will he be replaced by? Will it be Lord Young there? Lord Young, who took such a key part in the election and is reputed to be Mrs. Thatcher's choice as the next party chairman, although other senior Conservatives think it would be a bad idea. Well, will Norman Tebbit now quit politics for good, or will he, in 3 or 4 years' time, make a comeback and contend for the leadership of the party? Coupled with the cheers for Norman Tebbit are the cheers for Mrs. Margaret Tebbit. And the Conservative conference here in Blackpool gives Norman Tebbit a thunderous send-off, if it is a send-off, which many people think it is.
Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Minister of Trade and Industry, Minister of Agriculture, John McGregor, Paul Channon, Secretary for Transport, John Moore, who spoke yesterday on social services, the Leader of the House of Commons, the new leader, John Wakeham, Cecil Parkinson, who had a terrific reception, the best of all the members of the Cabinet this week, apart from the Prime Minister herself, who's now back in as Secretary of State for Energy, and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, John Major, a man with an important role to play. And now the organ music is playing again. The financial appeal appears to be over. And a few moments ago, the Prime Minister, who's been at the Imperial Hotel all morning doing the final touches to her speech, came out of this fortress Imperial, which it's been all week, very heavily guarded by police on the ground, by helicopters in the air, and by ships at sea to prevent any approach across the beaches of Blackpool. Gets into her car and drives off towards the Winter Gardens, where we are waiting for her to come in. She's been working on her speech during the week.
I would like to
finished earlier than usual last night at about 1 o'clock in the morning and went to bed and has been working on it again this morning. An important speech because it has not only to combine policy. Mrs. Tebbit there sitting behind Norman Tebbit with the dark spectacles on, who was badly injured in the Brighton bomb explosion. She has to make a speech which both celebrates what everybody here wants to celebrate, which is a majority of over 100 in a third successive victory, and at the same time to chart something of the way ahead. Well, now the president of the party is also Cabinet Minister, Secretary for Defence, George Younger, is speaking, so let's listen to him as he starts off these proceedings this afternoon.
And I'm sure you will all do so very generously indeed. Secondly, if you are going back to the Imperial Hotel, could you please remember not to hand your conference passes back here, as the security will still be on at the Imperial Hotel when you get back, and you won't be able to get in to collect your belongings because you won't have a pass. So if you're in the Imperial Hotel, stick to your pass. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I now have the very happy task of thanking on your behalf Dame Joan Seckham for her magnificent chairmanship of this conference. Now I know that everyone in this hall will agree with me, Joan, that this has been an outstandingly successful conference, and that almost all of the credit for that falls without doubt to you. Indeed, we have so enjoyed your chairmanship that we would be extremely sad to be losing you today were it not for the fact that you are to be swiftly reincarnated as a vice chairman of the party, an inspired appointment in which we all wish you well. We would also like to add our warmest thanks to your husband, Laurie, not only for supporting you in all you have done, but for being here himself at your side throughout this conference. I now have, by tradition, the pleasure of presenting you, Joan, with this conference bell, suitably gift-wrapped. Although I must confess that those of us who know you are somewhat puzzled as to what the circumstances could possibly be in which you would need a bell to draw anyone's attention to you. However, I'm sure you will find it useful, and we hope that you and Laurie will ring it to each other for many years to come. Congratulations.
This is the traditional presentation of the bell. Remember, many years ago, Lord Hailsham got it and raised it above his head and let it ring out. We'll see whether Dame Joan does the same. Only a tinkle from it, I think.
Can you hear? I might ring it in a minute. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, somebody said once that a week in politics was a long time. I can't remember who, and I'm sure it doesn't matter anyway. It has been a week that has seemed long in some ways and very short in others. But what a special week. Laurie and I will never, ever forget the friendship, the welcome, and the support that you have given us. And I do thank you from the very bottom of our hearts. This bell will be a permanent reminder of this very, very happy week. Thank you very much indeed.
Dame Joan Seckham referring to a week being a long time in politics, Harold Wilson's famous phrase. Her husband is a solicitor. She's had a long career in the Conservative Party, chairman of all sorts of groups within it.
Bring thoughts about what they're meant for, and I always think they signal something rather special. So I shall just say, because I know I shouldn't, and I feel perhaps I'm drunk with power being here. Because that's the signal of the highlight of our conference. Thank you very much indeed.
Barely a loud enough ring to summon anyone with that bell. Dame Joan, who's been chairing this conference in a very lively and cheerful way. And now, music that Andrew Lloyd Webber wrote for the election campaign. It's rather noisy. It's called by the members of the party, "It's Great to Be Great." And there was a video made to go with it. And it's used as a sort of Tory triumphant march now. I don't know how long it's going to go on for, but anyway, I think it will herald the arrival here of the Prime Minister and Dennis Thatcher in just a moment. Seems to be causing quite a lot of amusement among the members of the cabinet. A lot of grinning at this music, which they heard during the election campaign. It was played every morning to the journalists while they waited for the election conferences to begin. Lord Young tapping in time. The two Kenneths perhaps wondering whether to sing to it. I don't think it actually has any words to it. There's Lord McAlpine in the pink and green tie at the back there. Important man. He chairs the finance committee of the party and has been raising funds for it. Mrs. Anne Parkinson just behind him. You may recognize her in the second row from the back there. Well, we have another minute or so, apparently, of this clashing music to go. And they're running a bit late because it's now 26 minutes past 2. They're about 5 minutes or so late, a bit behind time. Douglas Hurd and Norman Fowler, I think, asking perhaps for the music to be turned down a bit. Rather concerned-looking Chancellor and slightly displeased. A sigh of relief, I think, from Nigel Lawson and from the hall. Sir Parkinson has been on terrific form. He was wondering what his reception here would be when he came back into the cabinet and came back here for the first time. And when he actually arrived on the platform, there was terrific applause for him. And so the Prime Minister arrives. And they change to "I do like to be beside the seaside." And they start clapping in time, waving and cheering as she comes onto the platform.
Prime Minister, on behalf of everyone at this conference, I would like to extend to you a particularly warm welcome on this very special year. Never before this century has a Prime Minister in office won a hat-trick of 3 successive general election victories. This achievement is unique, and it is yours. When you became our leader, we had no doubt that you would become Prime Minister. When you became Prime Minister, we had no doubt that you would make an outstandingly great Prime Minister. What we did not perhaps expect was that you would become, as you have, without doubt, the outstanding leader in the Western world. But, Prime Minister, through many great events over these years, you have given to us not only your leadership, but your warmth and your friendship as well. And this has been delightfully enhanced by the unfailing presence of Dennis, who has been such a firm support to you and friend to all of us. It is therefore with feelings of great respect and real affection that we welcome you and ask you to address us.
Mr. President, friends, thank you for that wonderful welcome. It is my first duty and pleasure to pay tribute to the police, and especially to the Lancashire police, for the protection they have given to our conference at Blackpool. Their professionalism, their dedication have ensured that no matter what the threat, nothing will stop the free debate of a political party in Britain. The police and the security forces are the true guardians of our liberties, and to them we extend our deep gratitude. Mr. President, a lot has happened since we last met. There was, for instance, our election victory in June. They tell me that it makes 3 wins in a row. Just like Lord Liverpool, and he was Prime Minister for 15 years. It's rather encouraging. It was an historic victory, and I want to thank all those who did so much. Above all, our chairman, Norman Tebbit. Norman and Margaret hold and will always hold a unique place in our esteem and affection. Thank you too, Margaret, for being with us. And on the 11th of June, we even won some 9 seats we had failed to gain in 1983. And we won back 3 we lost at by-elections. To the victors, we say congratulations. To our former colleagues who lost, come back soon, we miss you. Just why did we win? I think it is because we knew what we stood for, we said what we stood for, and we stuck by what we stood for. And since the election, it sometimes seems we're the only party that does. Mr. President, 12 years ago, I first stood on this platform as leader of the Conservative Party. Now, 1 or 2 things have changed since 1975. In that year, we were still groaning under Labour's so-called social contract. People said we should never be able to govern again. Remember how we'd all been lectured about political impossibility. You couldn't be a Conservative and sound like a Conservative and win an election, they said. And you certainly couldn't win an election and then act like a Conservative and win another election. And this was absolutely beyond dispute. You couldn't win 2 elections and go on behaving like a Conservative and yet win a 3rd election. Don't you harbor just the faintest suspicion that somewhere along the line something went wrong with that theory? Right up to the 11th of June, the Labour Party, the Liberals and the SDP were busy saying that conservatism doesn't work. Oddly enough, since the 12th of June, they've been saying that it does. And so our political opponents are now feverishly packaging their policies to look like ours. And it's interesting that no party now dares to say openly that it will take away from the people what we have given back to the people. Mr. President, Labour's language may alter, their presentation may be slicker, but underneath, it's still the same old socialism. Far be it from me to deride the sinner that repenteth. The trouble with Labour is they want the benefit of repentance without renouncing the original sin. No way! And the so-called alliance, during the election campaign, I used to wonder what the alliance leaders meant by consensus politics. I have a feeling that if Dr. Owen didn't know it before, he knows now. 6 inches of fraternal steel beneath the shoulder blades. But, Mr. President, we are a successful party, leading a successful nation. And I'm often asked, what's the secret? It's really quite simple. What we have done is to re-establish at the heart of British politics a handful of simple truths. First, no economy can thrive if government debases the coinage. No society can be fair or stable when inflation eats up savings and devalues the pound in everyone's pockets. Inflation threatens democracy itself. We've always put its defeat at the top of our agenda, for it's a battle which never ends. It means keeping your budget on a sound financial footing, not just one year, but every year. And that's why we need Nigel Lawson. And second, men and women need the incentive that comes from keeping more of what they earn. No one can say that people aren't interested in their take-home pay. If that were true, a lot of trade union leaders would be out of a job. So as economic growth has taken off, we've cut income tax. And as soon as we prudently can, we'll do it again. And third, as people earn more, they want to own more. They value the security which comes from ownership, whether of shares or homes. Soon, there will be more shareholders than trade unionists in this country. Of course, not all trade unionists are shareholders, yet. But I hope that before long they will be. Home ownership too has soared. And to extend the right to council tenants, we had to fight the battle, as you know, the battle in Parliament every inch of the way, against Labour opposition and against Liberal opposition. Does the Labour leader now applaud what has happened? Does the Liberal leader welcome it? Surely now that it's proved so popular, it must be the sort of liberating measure of which even he would approve. For years, we Conservatives had talked about wanting to create a property-owning democracy. Looking back, I wonder whether we did as much as we should have done to achieve that goal. But I don't believe that anyone will be able in the years ahead to make a similar charge against this government. Indeed, extending ownership has been one of the achievements of which I am most proud. And fourth, it is our passionate belief that free enterprise and competition are the engines of prosperity and the guardians of liberty. These ideas have shaped free political institutions and brought unimagined wealth to countries and continents. And just look what we have achieved: low inflation, tax cuts, wider ownership, a revival of enterprise. And over the last year, unemployment has fallen at record speed. by 400,000, and we want it to fall further. And with continued economic growth, it should. And our economic success has enabled Britain to play a more prominent role in the world at large. We are now the second biggest investor in the world, and the very model of a stable economy. And that's why Nigel Lawson has been able to play a leading role in helping to tackle the world debt crisis. International bankers, the finance ministers of other nations, they all listen to you a lot harder when they owe you money rather than the other way round. The old Britain of the 1970s, with its strikes, poor productivity, low investment, winters of discontent, above all its gloom, its pessimism, its sheer defeatism, that Britain is gone. And we now have a new Britain, confident, optimistic, sure of its economic strength, a Britain to which foreigners come to admire, to invest, yes, and to imitate. I've reminded you where the great political adventure began and where it has led. But is this where we pitch our tents? Is this where we dig in? Absolutely not. Our third election victory was only a staging post on a much longer journey. And I know with every fiber of my being that it would be fatal for us just to stand where we are now. What would be our slogan for the 1990s if we did that? Would consolidate be the word that we stitch on our banners? Whose blood would run faster at the prospect of 5 years of consolidation? Of course we secure what we've achieved, but we move on, applying our principles and beliefs to even more challenging ground. For our purpose as Conservatives is to extend opportunity and choice to those who have so far been denied them. Mr. President, our most important task in this Parliament is to raise the quality of education. And you heard what Kenneth Baker had to say about it in that most interesting, stimulating debate we had the other day. It's in the national interest and it's in the individual interest of every parent and above all of every child. We want education to be part of the answer to Britain's problems, not part of the cause. To compete successfully in tomorrow's world against Japan, Germany, and the United States, we need well-educated, well-trained, creative young people. Because if education is backward today, national performance will be backward tomorrow. But it's the plight of individual boys and girls which worries me most. Too often, our children don't get the education they need, the education they deserve. And in the inner cities, where youngsters must have a decent education if they are to have a better future, that opportunity is all too often snatched from them by hard left education authorities and extremist teachers. And children who need to be able to count and multiply are learning anti-racist mathematics, whatever that may be. Children who need to be able to express themselves in clear English are being taught political slogans. Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay. And children who need encouragement, and children do so much need encouragement, as so many children, they are being taught that our society offers them no future. All of those children are being cheated of a sound start in life. Yes, cheated. Of course, in the country as a whole, there are plenty of excellent teachers and successful schools. Indeed, every good school and every good teacher is a reminder of what too many young people are denied. I believe that government must take the primary responsibility for setting standards for the education of our children. And that's why we are establishing a national curriculum for basic subjects. It is vital that children master essential skills, reading, writing, spelling, grammar, arithmetic, and that they understand basic science and technology. And for good teachers, this will provide a foundation on which they can build with their own creative skill and professionalism. But the key to raising standards is to enlist the support of parents. The Labour left, hard, soft, and in between, they hate the idea that people should be able to choose. In particular, they hate the idea that parents should be able to choose their children's education. The Conservative Party believes in parental choice. And we are now about to take two dramatic steps forward in extending choice in education. First, we will allow popular schools to take in as many children as space will permit, and this will stop local authorities from putting artificially low limits on entry to good schools. And second, we will give parents and governors the right to take their children's school out of the hands of the local authority and into the hands of their own governing body. This will create a new kind of school funded by the state alongside the present state schools and the independent private schools. These new schools will be independent state schools. And they will bring a better education to many children because the school will be in the hands of those who care most for it and for its future. Mr. President, there's no reason at all why local authorities should have a monopoly of free education. What principle suggests that this is right? And what recent experience or practice suggests that it's even sensible? And so in these ways, we are furthering our conservative tradition of extending opportunity more widely. This policy will be of the greatest advantage, not to those schools where the parents are already satisfied with their children's education, but to those schools where the parents are dissatisfied and believe that their children could do a lot better. And nowhere is this policy more needed than in what have come to be known as inner cities. It will profit those people most. Now, Mr. President, the phrase inner cities is a kind of convenient shorthand for a host of problems. Cities have risen and declined throughout history. Risen by responding to the opportunities that markets and technologies of their day have offered, and declined when they clung to old, outdated ways and new markets passed them by. That is what's happened to many of our great cities. And their decline has sometimes been aggravated by the worst form of post-war town planning, a sort of social vandalism carried out with the best of intentions but the worst of results. All too often, the planners cut the heart out of our cities. They swept aside the familiar city centre that had grown up over the centuries. They replaced them with a wedge of tower blocks and linking expressways, interspersed with token patches of grass and a few windswept piazzas where pedestrians fear to tread. The planners didn't think, are we breaking the pattern of people's lives? Are we cutting them off from their friends, their neighbors? They didn't wonder, are we uprooting whole communities? They didn't ask, can children still play safely in the street? They didn't consider any of these things, nor did they consult the police about how to design an estate in which people could walk safe from muggers and vandals. They simply set the municipal bulldozer to work. What folly! What incredible folly! And the people who didn't fit into this urban utopia, they dispatched them to outlying estates without a pub or corner shop or anywhere to go. Oh, the schemes won a number of architectural awards, but they were a nightmare for the people. They snuffed out any spark of local enterprise, and they made people entirely dependent on the local authorities and the services they chose to provide. And as if that were not enough, some of our cities have also been dominated by Labour councils implacably hostile to enterprise. So when industries left, they piled higher rates on those that remained. When old markets vanished, they sought not new markets, but new subsidies. And they capitalized not on their strengths, but on their weaknesses. And in fact, they accelerated decline. And so dying industries, soulless planning, municipal socialism, these deprive the people of the most precious things in life: hope, confidence, and belief in themselves. And that sapping of the spirit is at the very heart of urban decay. Mr. President, to give back heart to our cities, we must give back hope to the people. And it's beginning to happen, because today Britain has a strong and growing economy. Oh yes, recovery has come faster in some parts of the country than in others. But now it is taking root in our most depressed urban landscapes. We all applaud the organization Business in the Community. It is over 300 major firms that have come together to assist in reviving the urban communities from which so many of them sprang. We recall that so many of the amenities of our towns and cities, the parks and public gardens, the libraries and art galleries, the churches and schools, they had their origin in the philanthropy of men who'd made good themselves, and they wanted to do good for others. That impulse, that sense of obligation to the wider community, it is that we must enlist today. I've seen the start of recovery for myself on Teesside, in Gateshead, in Wolverhampton and the West Midlands, and in Glasgow, which is undergoing a remarkable revival, thanks largely to the work of George Younger and Malcolm Rifkind. I shall never forget one Glaswegian I met on my visit there. "How do you do?" I said. "My name's Margaret Thatcher." "Mine's Winston Churchill," he replied. And astonishingly enough, it was. And he produced a document to prove it. Winston Harry Churchill, an absolutely splendid person. Mr. President, to speed up the process of recovery in these and other places, we have a whole battery of special measures and programs. You heard about them from Kenneth Clark. Special measures and programs to clear derelict land, to renovate rundown council estates, and to regenerate city centres, and to turn dereliction into development. But by themselves, these measures are not enough. We must also give people in the inner cities the opportunity to improve their own lives and the belief that they can do it. The major reforms in our program are, of course, designed for the whole country, but they will be of particular benefit to inner cities. We will free tenants from their dependence on council landlords. We will free parents to choose the schools they want for their children. We will free businesses in the urban development areas from irksome planning restrictions and controls. And with our rate reform legislation, socialist councils will no longer be able to drive out small businesses and destroy employment by imposing sky-high rates. And above all, the community charge will make local councils far more accountable to all their voters. Look at all these things. Taken together, these measures will greatly reduce the power of the local council over tenants, parents, pupils, and businesses, and greatly increase the opportunities open to those very people. To coin a phrase, it is an irreversible shift of power in favor of working people and their families. Mr. President, the social problems of some inner cities are deep-seated. Quick and easy solutions are not possible. But the philosophy of enterprise and opportunity, which has put the spark back into the national economy, that is the way and the only way to rejuvenate our cities and restore their confidence and pride. But our greatest concern in inner cities and elsewhere is to reverse the tide of crime which disfigures our lives. To reverse the tide of crime, for it disfigures all our lives. On Wednesday, we debated crime with a depth of concern that reflects the feelings of every decent person in this country. For crime invades homes, it breaks hearts, it drags down neighborhoods, and it spreads fear. The government is playing its full part in the fight against crime. We've strengthened the police. We've introduced tougher sentences. Violent crime concerns us above all. It's not just that violent crime is worse than other crime, it's much worse. And that's why we are now taking tougher action against knives and against guns. And even so, the feeling persists that some of the sentences passed by the courts have not measured up to the enormity of the crime. And so, as Douglas Hurd announced this week, we shall be introducing legislation to provide for an appeal against sentences which are too lenient. And may I point out, it will be the second time this government has brought a measure of this kind before Parliament. And I hope that this time it will receive a speedy passage onto the statute book. But we shall make little progress in the drive against crime if we expect the police and the courts to take the whole burden. When we're sick, we turn to the doctor, yet we accept responsibility for taking care of our health. When fire breaks out, we call in the fire brigade, yet we know it is up to us to take sensible precautions against fire. So it is with crime. There is enormous scope for the public to help the police in what, after all, is a common duty. Scope in Neighborhood Watch, in Business Watch, in crime prevention, in prompt reporting of crime seen or suspected, and in readiness to give evidence. But even that is not enough. Mr. President, civilized society doesn't just happen. It has to be sustained by standards widely accepted and upheld. And we must draw on the moral energy of society. And we must draw on the values of family life, for the family is where, in the first place, the family is the first place where we learn those habits of mutual love, tolerance, and service on which every healthy nation depends for its survival. It was Sir William Haley, the great editor of the Times, who 20 years ago said this: "There are things which are bad and false and ugly, and no amount of argument or specious casuistry will make them good or true or beautiful. It is time that these things were said." And he said them. But if we are to succeed today, all those in authority must recover that confidence and speak with a strong, emphatic, and single voice, because too often they speak in different and conflicting voices. The great majority of crimes are committed by young people in their teens and early 20s. It is on such impressionable young people that anti-police propaganda and the glamorization of crime can have the most deadly effect. And when left-wing councils and left-wing teachers criticize the police, they give moral sanction to the criminally inclined. When the broadcasters flout their own standards on violent television programs, they risk a brutalizing effect on the morally unstable. When the Labour Party refuses to support the Prevention of Terrorism Act, an act that saves lives, they weaken society. They weaken society's resistance to the modern scourge of terrorism. local councils, teachers, broadcasters, politicians, all of us have a responsibility to uphold the civilized values which underpin the law. We owe it to society of which we are a part, and we owe it especially to future generations who will inherit the society that we create. Mr. President, our conference takes place at a time which could prove to be a historic turning point in world affairs. And we can say with some pride that Britain has played a major part in creating the opportunities which now open up before us. It is, of course, a time of tension and even of danger in the Persian Gulf. But there, too, Britain is giving a strong lead, and I do indeed pay tribute to both Geoffrey Howe and you, Mr. President, for the lead which you have given. May I join you, Mr. President, in speaking for this whole conference, and indeed for the people of this country, when I express our thanks and our appreciation to the merchant officers and seamen who sail that vital waterway, and to the Royal... and to the Royal Navy's Armilla Patrol and its minesweepers which protect them. We honor their dedication and their courage. But today is also a time of hope. See, there's no mistaking the bracing air of change in the Soviet Union. In my many hours of talking with Mr. Gorbachev in Moscow earlier this year, his determination to bring about far-reaching reform was plain. The difficulties and obstacles confronting him are massive, but we must recognize that anything which increases human liberty, which extends the boundaries of discussion, and which increases initiative and enterprise in the Soviet Union is of fundamental importance in terms of human rights, and that's why we support it. That's why we have publicly welcomed and encouraged those aspects of Mr. Gorbachev's reforms which do just this. They're genuinely courageous, not least in their admission that after 70 years, the socialist system has failed to produce the standards of life the Russian people want. But, Mr. President, we have yet to see that change carried through into the Soviet Union's policies towards the outside world. Traditional instruments of Soviet power, military strength, subversion, propaganda, are all being exercised as vigorously as ever. Afghanistan is still occupied. The Berlin Wall still stands. And Soviet weapons are still pouring into third world countries which need arms, which need food, not arms. They get the food from the free world and arms from the Soviet Union. There is, however, hope in the agreement, which now seems certain to be signed later this autumn by the United States and the Soviet Union to eliminate medium and shorter-range nuclear missiles. We welcome that agreement. Indeed, Britain has contributed in a major way to its achievement. It's a success for the West, especially for the United States and President Reagan. But let us remember one thing. If we had listened to the Labour Party and to CND, insofar as you can distinguish between the two, that agreement would never have been achieved. the Russians would have kept their 1,300 nuclear warheads, while the West would have given away its 300 for nothing in return. That lesson must never be forgotten. Reductions in nuclear weapons come about not from weakness, but from strength. Our policies, conservative policies, are bearing fruit, and we have every reason to be pleased. But we must not let satisfaction turn to euphoria. We are ready for improved relations with the Soviet Union, but we can't afford to take anything on trust. Nor should we be deceived by changes in style rather than substance. We shall continue to judge the Soviet Union not by what they say, but by what they do. We believe that the strategic nuclear weapons of the United States and the Soviet Union could be reduced by 50% without endangering Western security. But so long as the Soviet Union continues to enjoy massive superiority in chemical and conventional forces, we say that reductions in nuclear weapons in Europe have gone far enough. As a Supreme Allied Commander in Europe reminded us recently, it's not a nuclear-free Europe we want, it's a war-free Europe. Nuclear weapons will continue to play a vital role in preventing war in Europe, as they have done for 40 years. And that is why we shall press ahead with Trident and the modernization of our independent deterrent, vital to our security. Mr. President, the British people want peace, but it must be a peace with freedom and justice. And that peace is only maintained by keeping our defenses strong, by resisting violence and intimidation at home, and by standing up to tyrants and terrorists abroad. That is the true spirit of the British people. That is the spirit which sustained us through 2 world wars, and it guides us still. Mr. President, you may perhaps have heard that I'm a faithful student of Rudyard Kipling, and occasionally I've even been known to quote him. So it won't come as a complete surprise if I refer to his poem, Recessional, in which he warned us to beware of boasting and to keep a humble and a contrite heart. That's sound advice to any government. But may I say today, we have both a right and a duty to remind the whole free world that once more Britain is confident, strong, and trusted. Confident because attitudes have changed. Can't be done has given way to what's to stop us. Strong because our economy is enterprising, competitive, and expanding. And trusted because we are known to be a powerful ally and a faithful friend. this has been made possible by the national revival which we have carried through, and everyone in this hall and millions outside it can claim a share in that revival. Now, once again, it has fallen to the Conservatives to lead the nation into the 1990s. Let us face that future with quiet confidence, born of what we have accomplished in the last 8 years. Britain's institutions are shaped by the character of her people. It's all that is gifted, just, and fair in that character which reassures our friends and allies and brings hope to those who have yet to know the liberty we take for granted. Mr. President, it is a great trust which has been placed in our care. May we never fail that trust.
Margaret Thatcher, giving her 13th conference speech to a Tory party conference, acknowledges the enthusiastic applause and a standing ovation from her followers. They applauded at practically every sentence. There weren't many rousing passages of applause. The biggest applause came when she said that the sentences for crime did not sometimes measure up to the enormity of the crime. She spent a great deal of time on education, putting it as a priority for the next Parliament, that she was going to raise the quality of education, and she disclosed that they were going to start a new kind of school, which she disclosed the name of the independent state schools, resulting when parents and governors choose to opt out of the state system. The ovation continues in thunderous style, as is the custom on these occasions, but this is celebrating the third election victory in succession. And on that, Mrs. Thatcher hinted that she might go on beyond 1992, because she said Lord Liverpool's 15 years were very encouraging, and 15 years would take us on to 1994. And in explaining the Conservative Party's policies towards the inner cities and education, she borrowed a phrase from Labour's manifesto, so beloved of Mr. Tony Benn. She proposed an irreversible shift of power in favour of working people and their families. And on defence, she emphasised, or re-emphasised, that as long as the Russian superiority continues in chemical and conventional weapons, we say that reductions in nuclear weapons have gone far enough. And she quoted from Kipling's Recession at the End, which was one of Harold Wilson's favourite poems. I hand you now to my colleague David Dimbleby, while I gather with two observers who will give you some comment on the proceedings in a few moments.
Prime Minister rises again and bows to this 3,500, perhaps 4,000 strong audience of Conservative representatives who've been at this conference. After a strong speech, one of the strongest I think she's given, absolutely clear about the way forward for the Conservative Party, talking about all the specific points that Robin Day mentioned, and then at the same time stressing the morality, as she saw it, that lay behind the Conservatives' policies. Terrific cheers as Dennis Thatcher, who had a special word of praise from the President of the National Union, George Younger, before Mrs. Thatcher spoke, comes forward and takes a wave there. But she called for an appeal for people in authority to recover the confidence and speak with a strong, emphatic and single voice against things that were bad and false and ugly, and which no amount of argument or specious casuistry would make good or true or beautiful. She was citing Sir William Haley, the great editor of the Times, who was also, incidentally, a great Director General of the BBC. Mrs. Thatcher in a very confident mood here. Delivering the speech far better than many of her cabinet ministers who've been using the same autocue technique that she was using during the week. Perhaps very slightly tense at the beginning and now very relaxed. Norman Tebbit acknowledging the cheers. He's been almost as popular as she has during this conference. Every time he appears here, there's a great roar of applause. Cecil Parkinson, who also re-emerged as a conference darling this year. The Home Secretary. We'll listen to her endorsement of his proposed plans on crime. Nigel Lawson, who was singled out for special praise, and she said of him that we need him there, which may dampen his hopes for moving. Some people think that he's had enough of the Chancellorship now. But when the Prime Minister says you're needed where you are, you stay. And this extraordinary atmosphere at Conservative Party conferences on the last day, particularly after a victory like this. People in the galleries waving. There are flags, which we saw in Conservative rallies during the party conference. There are people with umbrellas waving them and signs. And the whole thing has an air of festivity. Elements of the last night of the proms with the stomping from the galleries around. And the cheers go on unabated. It's gone on for 5 or 6 minutes so far, and I expect it'll go on for a good deal longer. Not everybody's been able to get into this hall.
Ladies and gentlemen.
And I expect in a moment Mrs. Thatcher, if she follows the normal pattern, will come down into the hall and go out into the anterooms outside where people will have been watching on television.
One last time.
George Younger asking for a moment's silence to try and speak, but he's not been successful. Lord Young, who Mrs. Thatcher would like to see as chairman of the party. Yes. Kenneth Baker on the right will be in charge of education. I think both of them have run out of applause now, and the whole of the cabinet, in fact, is sitting quiet, trying to temper the enthusiasm
Ladies and gentlemen,
of the representatives here, with absolutely no hope at all of success. A smile on the face even of Nicholas Ridley, the Secretary of State for the Environment.
one last, ladies and gentlemen.
Mr. King, Mr. Fowler there. They're quite used to this kind of reception, but it's still rather an impressive sight from the platform. And now they've all been brought to their feet. In an attempt, I think, once again to bring the long ovation to an end.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Maybe even sounding like a football crowd now, shouting a slogan which I couldn't clearly hear.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, it's futile to try and stop these representatives. They're all people who fought hard during the election campaign, who are delighted by the Conservative victory, and they've come here for this exact celebration, this rally this afternoon, buying special hats, buying Union Jacks or Conservative Party flags to wave, and they're not going to have the President of the National Union, George Younger, stop them, even though he's at the microphone trying to speak and still not getting through.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Time to move on. Time to move on.
Well, if it goes on like this, the ovation will last longer than her speech. It's already taken 10 minutes of ovation. She spoke for under 50 minutes herself.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Marvellous reception.
Well, every time he says thank you very much, they just start cheering again because
Thank
they're
you
frightened he
very
may be
much
going to
for
try and
that
stop them.
marvellous reception. Can you sit down so that
It's
we
one of
can
the longest ovations I can remember. Some of the people not clapping there, incidentally, are not unenthusiastic Conservatives necessarily. They're more likely to be foreign visitors because on a big occasion like this, the foreign embassies send their
ladies and
representatives
gentlemen,
here.
Thank you very much. Please.
Ambassadorial rank sometimes. The American ambassador was here yesterday.
End of the proceedings.
Other observers from the
Thank you
press, from
very
foreign
much.
newspapers,
Time to move on.
who sit slightly bemused looking on to this